The following program presents principles designed to promote good health and is not intended to take the place of personalized professional care. The opinions and ideas expressed are those of the speaker. Viewers are encouraged to draw their own conclusions about the information presented.
Hello and welcome to Health for a Lifetime. I'm your host, Don McIntosh. We're glad you've joined us today. Today we're going to be talking about a disease that has put fear in many people in Europe, and now recently has also been something that's come on the specter in America and perhaps in other places around the world. We're going to be talking about this disease with Dr. Tim Arnott. He is a physician at the Lifestyle Center in Oklahoma. That's actually a place where people go to address the common killer diseases of America: diabetes, high blood pressure, all these different things, and address those diseases through lifestyle means. He's a medical doctor who's practiced for about 14 years. Dr. Arnott, we're glad you're with us today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Now, what is this disease that is striking some fear in the hearts of Americans that has also been something that the Europeans have struggled with?
Well, many people are familiar with bacteria, viruses, fungus as infectious agents.
Right.
Things that you can transmit from one organism to another. But there's a new agent that most people now are familiar with, and that is a protein, an infectious protein.
And what is this infectious protein?
Well, it's an infectious protein that, if you've studied physiology at all, biochemistry, you understand that proteins have a specific shape that gives those proteins their unique function. And you also understand, if you study biochemistry, that if you change one amino acid in that protein chain, it'll change the shape and give you a new function.
So what is this variant protein that we're worried about?
It's called a prion protein, and it's a protein that all of us have. We all have the prion protein. But in the case of this disease that we're going to be talking about, this prion protein takes on an abnormal shape. In fact, the shape of the normal protein has much of the coiled structure that we find.
Okay, so what is this? You're killing me here. What is this? What is this thing we're going to talk about?
We're going to be talking about mad cow disease.
Okay.
And
it's a prion. It's a protein that's not shaped the right way and causes problems.
That's right. And it's actually this prion protein, this abnormal protein, got into the food supply of the cattle and sheep over in Great Britain, and because they were rendering or taking the remains of a sheep, the remains of a cow, and they were removing that, sending it to the rendering industry, and then they were reprocessing that into a high-protein food supplement, feeding back to the animals.
So they were feeding the animals, and this caused the problem.
That's right. It reinfected more and more sheep, more and more cattle with the abnormal prions.
So why are people so concerned about this? What does this do?
Well, we've discovered, it was thought that there was a species barrier, and that humans were not able to get infected by the abnormal prion in the sheep or in the cattle. But as we learned over in Great Britain in 1996, if you ate meat that was infected with these abnormal prions in the form of a hamburger, for example, especially the hamburgers that came from meat that was processed using a highly mechanized method that was able to invade the spinal cord and some of the brain tissue and include that in that hamburger, those individuals picked up high amounts of these abnormal prions and came down with a human form of the disease, which we call CJD, or Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, in their teens, 20s, and 30s.
And did they live?
It's always fatal, no treatment.
So this is why people are so upset, because
Absolutely.
It's something that's hard to watch an animal go through, but if you get it, you die. And so people are just are really interested in this, especially, of course, over in Europe. It changed things, and now coming here to this side of the country, and probably in other parts of the world, people are also watching this closely. What effect has this had, the discovery of this disease, on physicians?
Well, the Centers for Disease Control publishes a weekly report, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report out of the Centers for Disease Control. And one of the most recent issues in January published a report of the very first mad cow that was discovered in this country. And we got the confirmation that it was indeed a mad cow from the International Reference Laboratory in Great Britain on Christmas Eve of last year. And so this has, of course, been in the press. Many people are aware of it. The government has moved very quickly to reassure the public that they're taking steps to prevent the spread of this kind of disease. But the CDC wanted to let physicians know that they should be on the alert for patients that may have symptoms indicative of variant CJD.
So they've been communicating with the physicians, and I suppose, well, if the disease is fatal if you get it, it's not because they want them to treat it, because there's no real treatment for it, but they want to know whether or not there's a problem.
They want to know if there's a problem. They want to know how widespread it is. They want to know, indeed, okay, we've got a mad cow. What about the effect in humans? Do we have humans in this country who are dying of the variant form of CJD, which is the form that you develop when you eat an infected prion? In fact, recently in the state of Washington, a gentleman died in about his fourth decade, so very young, who had an inconclusive test for the variant form of CJD, but he had the diagnosis of CJD. So we're not really sure. There people are developing these diseases, and we're not really sure if it's the variant form or if it's the more sporadic form.
Well, this has come more on the radar screen, and you know, sometimes people watch a program and they say, oh, they're just trying to hype this and get everybody frightened. And I'm sure you're not trying to do that, but as a physician, you really think people should be aware and take steps that can protect them of getting this disease. Is that the reason?
One of the reasons that we talk about this at the Lifestyle Center of America is that we want individuals to know the fringe benefits of adopting a plant-based diet.
Fringe benefits, you mean it's not a big concern, but it is there.
There are, yes, exactly. I mean, this is not a huge issue. It was estimated that probably 1 million cattle in Great Britain were infected with these abnormal prions, and yet only 150 Great Britons actually came down with the overt variant form of the disease. So, probably a lot of people were exposed that didn't come down with it.
Now, lots of governments have taken steps in dealing with this. I know that some of them will just say, hey, wait until you get that taken care of. We can't allow your product to come into our country and these different things. So many different governments relate in different ways, and different people around the world will, be watching the program and thinking about it from their perspective. What has the United States done to try and make sure that this doesn't spread?
Well, one of the most highly at-risk cattle groups, if you will, are what we call downer cows. Now, downer cows are those cows that are disabled to the point where they're not able to walk anymore. They're not able to stand up. And one of the presenting symptoms of mad cow disease is a cow that is neurologically compromised to the point where it can no longer stand up. And so if you've got cattle that are having that problem, that's where you want to do your testing. That's where you want to put your focus. Previous to Christmas Eve of 2003, we were allowing these 100,000 plus downer cows to go into our food supply in this country. So one of the first steps that the government took in reaction to finding a mad cow in the United States was to say, okay,
no more downer cows?
No more downer cows can enter the food supply of the
And
human.
they actually were allowing 100,000 a year to go in. They were falling down and all that stuff. But
That's correct.
They've allowed them to go in. What else have they done?
Well, the other thing, one of the other things that they were doing, and that they're now not doing, fortunately, is that if they took a cow out, they suspected perhaps that it may have mad cow disease, and they'd pull it out and they would sample its brain tissue, send it to the lab, and that animal, the rest of the carcass, would be stamped USDA approved, and it would be sent on into the human food supply even before the test results were back. So now we're requiring that the test results get back before the cow carcass is released for entry into the food chain.
That sort of didn't make sense to let it go without really testing it out, but they're really looking at it now.
That's right. So, a lot of good things are coming out of this. One of the other things that's coming out of this is that, previously they were allowing certain high-risk tissues to enter the food chain. And currently, if a cow is over 2.5 years of age, there are a number of different tissues that are not allowed to enter the human food chain. Such as the spinal cord, the skull, the trigeminal ganglion. In other words, different nervous
parts of the brain
tissues.
And parts of the nerves.
That's correct.
Well, if those things are infected, how do they know it's not infecting other parts?
Well, see, that's the thing. If your test isn't very sensitive, you can miss the prion in muscle, for example, and think it's not there. And that's why adopting a plant-based diet, or at least a largely plant-based diet, is just a win-win, because you can avoid many of the animal diseases, the diseases that is that are in animals.
Well, we've talked about this disease. We've called it mad cow disease, but we've also called the human form something called CJD. But then I also hear this acronym BSE. I don't know what to think. What's CD?
Well, BSE is the scientific, sophisticated form of mad cow disease.
And then what's?
Bovine for cattle, spongiform, because when you take a slice of the brain and look at it, it looks like a sponge. Encephalopathy, a brain disease.
And what's then CJD? Are they the same thing?
CJD is the equivalent disease in the human, caused by the prion, the abnormal prion, but it's the form in a human being.
So give me just a little history of this BSE that led to CJD.
Well, basically back in the 1700s, they had mad sheep disease, which they called scrapie, because sheep would become infected with the prions. And by the way, it's not really known how the sheep initially were infected with prions. You can actually have a genetic disorder where you have a deformed prion protein just from birth, from your parents. You inherit it. That's a rare situation. But somehow the sheep got these abnormal prion proteins back in the 1700s. And then as time went by, we were doing the rendering of the sheep.
In other words, feeding animals to animals.
Feeding animals to animals, which led to spread of the disease, spread of this infectious prion into other sheep. Sheep were being fed to cattle. Cattle picked it up. Cattle were being fed to cattle. So it spread in the cattle population. And in the late 1980s, humans actually started picking it up. So that's kind of the history
of how we got where
we got it. Now, there's 20 countries in Europe that have mad cow disease, and Israel and Japan also have had a few cases. Japan's had about 3 cases. Canada, of course, most of us are aware, had a case recently, and then now we have our own case.
They talk about variant and then classic CJD. What does this mean?
Well, for decades, we have had CJD in this country. We've had Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, a prion disease. But typically, it occurred in individuals who are about 70 years of age. The mean age is about 68. And these individuals would actually succumb very quickly in a matter of 4, 5, or 6 months at most. And so, and the presenting symptom, the initial symptom, was a frank dementia. So these individuals developed dementia.
Very bad dementia.
Bad dementia, very quick clinical course. And
so that's the classic form?
That's the classic form. If you do the sort of the EKG of the brain, the electroencephalogram, where they put the electrodes, those wires everywhere, you get these classic spikes in that
So that's been around a long time. But what's variant then?
Variant is the same kind of a disease. It's caused by prions. It has this progressive neurologic deterioration, but there are some differences. It occurs in young people. The mean age is 28 years of age, not 68. And people can last almost 2 years before they die.
And there's no chance of reversing it once you have it.
That's exactly right. And it's known that the variant disease, the young people's disease, is definitely associated with infected food. And so there's not that definite knowledge of how we get the other disease. But I will tell you that a recent cluster of the old form of the disease, the sporadic CJD, occurred in New Jersey recently, about 6 cases.
That's what the older form.
That's the older form. But they all occurred in individuals who lived in the same area and frequented the same betting track or racing track there in New Jersey, and ate meals there. So, we really don't know what the cause is. It may be that it's just a lower level of prion intake and it takes longer to show up.
We're talking with Dr. Tim Arnott. We're talking about mad cow disease, and we're getting an update on that. There are some things to be concerned about. There are some comforting things as well, as we see different governments taking steps and really wanting to get a handle of this. When we come back, we're going to look more at this interesting unfolding story, if you will. We hope you join us.
Have you found yourself wishing that you could shed a few pounds? Have you been on a diet for most of your life, but not found anything that will really keep the weight off? If you've answered yes to any of these questions, then we have a solution for you that works. Dr. Hans Diehl and Dr. Eileen Ludington have written a marvelous booklet called Reversing Obesity Naturally, and we'd like to send it to you free of charge. Here's a medically sound approach successfully used by thousands who were able to eat more and lose weight permanently without feeling guilty or hungry through lifestyle medicine. Dr. Diehl and Dr. Ludington have been featured on 3ABN, and in this booklet, they present a sensible approach to eating, nutrition, and lifestyle changes that can help you prevent heart disease, diabetes, and even cancer. Call or write today for your free copy of Reversing Obesity Naturally, and you could be on your way to a healthier, happier you. It's absolutely free of charge, so call or write today.
Welcome back. We've been talking with Dr. Tim Arnott. We've been talking about mad cow disease. We've been talking about what causes it, prions, and we've talked about some things we know about it, some things we don't know. Like, for instance, we don't know how to treat it. The doctor today says once you get it, that's it, and that's why people are so concerned about it. And we're not trying to hype it and make you more and more concerned, but we just want you to be aware of the most recent updates. And joining us to help us with that is Dr. Tim Arnott. He is a physician at the Lifestyle Center of America in Oklahoma, where they treat many different diseases that Americans struggle with: heart disease, diabetes, hypertension, obesity, all these different things. And he's with us today giving us an update on mad cow disease. We're glad you're with us again. And we've looked here at some of the history of this and how there are classic forms of it and there are variant forms of it. They're all very serious. We've talked about how our different governments have attempted to relate to this, and our own government in America here has attempted to relate to it. And it's a serious thing, but you've said something that I want to pick up on. You said that it's caused by prions, and that it's prion-type diseases like this have been around for a while in America. And prions are those variant proteins that aren't formed quite right, and they cause problems. Would you say we have a big prion problem in this country?
Well, actually, we do have an epidemic.
What's an epidemic?
Well, we have millions of animals that have prion diseases in this country. But it's the wild animals. It's the deer, the elk, and the antelope, including the mule deer and recently the white-tailed deer. And as many as 1–2% of the animals are infected with prions and are developing this wasting disease, the chronic wasting disease that we see in the wild animals. And Dr. Rice at the National Institutes of Health recently did a study where he looked at the prions that were infecting mad cows, the prions infecting wild game in this country, prions that were infecting sheep, and he tried to look and see if there were differences enough that he could subcategorize them. Say, okay, that prion has this little bit of a shape subtlety, and we know that that's a mad cow prion. What he found that he couldn't distinguish between the different prions. They were so similar, the one that causes mad cow disease, the one that causes the mad wild animal disease, that he could not put them into separate categories. And so, that's a bit of a concern. We have a major prion disease in this problem, but probably the most important message here is if you are into hunting. If you're into...
You think you're going to avoid getting this by having your own meat that you hunt what you're saying is that that's not really going to work.
You know, you're exactly right. I mean, a lot of people are saying, let's go to the wild animals. You know, they're lean, they don't have the fat content of the beef, for example. But, for example, we had a couple of hunters up in northeast Oklahoma, deer hunters. And these two individuals died with CJD, one just shy of his 30th birthday. If you have a young person in their 20s, 30s, 40s who develops an Alzheimer's-like dementia, that's a red flag, and that's an indication that that individual has probably ingested a prion. So if you're into hunting, don't eat what you shoot, and probably even better, avoid shooting.
Okay, how do we stop the spread of this? You've said it's in the wild animal population. We've seen now that it's also in some of the animals that we raise to eat, or rather raise to feed to other animals to eat, which we don't do anymore. How do we stop the spread of this? We already know it's here. How can we stop the spread in our country?
Well, I think one of the most important principles is illustrated by the discovery of a mad cow in this country in 2003. It led to an immediate aggressive movement by our government, by other state authorities, to deal with this problem, to protect the public to an even greater measure. So knowledge is power, and the more you know about where you stand with this problem, the better you're going to be able to protect the public and put into measures that will protect the public. So the classic example of how best to protect the public and to deal with this problem is illustrated by the Japanese.
What do they do?
The Japanese test every cattle brain that goes through the slaughterhouse. In other words, every cow that's going to be slaughtered gets tested, and it isn't sent out.
Doesn't that take a long time?
Well, actually, they're using in Japan and they're using in Europe a much more rapid test than we use. We use a test that's just as sensitive, it's just as good as what they're using, but it takes 2-3 days to get the results back. Whereas they can get results back in just a few hours. So while that animal carcass is going down to temperature and in the freezer room, they can, by the time it's in a frozen situation, they can have a test result back and they can either discard it.
But they have the very small country. I don't even know if they raise very many cattle over there. I mean, it's not a very big country. They probably raise some, but we probably raise millions, don't we?
We slaughter 35 million head every year. So yeah, it would be a major step for us. But the reality is that we've got to do better than we're doing. We've only tested 60,000 cattle so far in our history of testing, and so you can see how you could underestimate the problem and then not deal with it as aggressively.
So you're suggesting more aggressive testing, and so are others suggesting that. What about labels on foods or something? Do they have anything helping us out with that?
Well, actually, yes. If you see on a label just the word meat or a meat food product, these are products that are higher risk. In fact, they're currently in the process of banning those products, but you may still see them on a store shelf because those products are meat products that were obtained using a mechanical method that can actually be more invasive to the spinal cord and is more likely to take a piece of the spinal cord tissue where the prions are concentrated or the brain tissue.
In terms of our government, what are plans that they are putting into place? Are they going to have more rapid testing? Any other things they're going to do?
Yes, that's one of the things. A recent commission, by the way, our government enlisted the services of an international commission to look over our shoulder and see how we reacted to the 2003 discovery of a mad cow and make some recommendations. And one of the recommendations that they made was, yes, we need to start using the rapid tests so that we can more easily discover the disease if it does exist. They also suggested that mad cow disease is endemic in this country.
What's that mean?
Well, it means that we have it here. It's not just crossing over from Canada. It's rooted here. We have it. It's a problem we need to deal with and not think that it just came as a visitor.
So that's quite an acknowledgement and also makes us more aware and makes us safer just by saying that.
Exactly. And what it actually will hopefully do is encourage us to move to that plant-based diet.
What are the riskiest foods that we could eat?
Well, the riskiest foods that you can eat would be foods such as the hamburger, the sausage.
Why are those so risky?
Well, those are foods that are taken from, after they remove the steaks and the chops and the main muscle cuts, then everything that's left, or a lot of the things that are left, are ground up and put into those sausages, into the hamburgers, for example. And so you're more likely to get some of the nervous tissue that's not in the muscle tissue.
So what are the safest foods then?
Well, the safest foods, of course, are going to be plant foods. Beans, there's actually more protein in the soybean than any meat, any steak, for example. Beans are an excellent source of protein. And
what if you eat meat? Or
if you eat meat, then you basically want to avoid any processed meats, any ground meats.
Any wild?
Any wild meats, exactly. And you want to, basically be looking for...
Import it from Japan at this point.
Basically, yes. Now that you mentioned that, we should be aware that about 10% of the beef in this country is actually sold overseas. Mm-hmm. And it represents quite a chunk of money. And right now, the Japanese, for example, are not allowing our beef into their country. So, we need to watch some of these other countries and take how they're responding to our meat seriously.
Someone that's been eating meat all their life and different, animal products, they're listening now and they say, hey, I've been doing this all my life. Maybe I already have it. Can they decrease their risk by stopping now, or does the fact that they've been eating it all their life just kind of, they already have the risk?
No, there's no question about that. I mean, remember, over in Great Britain, 1 million cattle were probably infected with these abnormal prions and consumed by the public over there, and yet about only 150, mostly young people, came down with the disease. Well, they've done some studies, and they show that some of these young people were eating the highest risk meats, the hamburgers that came into the food market in the most cheap method. In other words, methods that were highly mechanical, methods that were most likely to get the brain and spinal cord tissue mixed in with that hamburger. So probably the young people that got the highest dose of these prions came down, those are the ones that came down with the disease. We know in lab studies of animals that if you give them greater amounts of prions, they'll come down with the disease more quickly, earlier.
So if you're eating meat and you've heard this and you're thinking about it and you think maybe I should stop, it's probably a good idea, you can definitely decrease your risk.
Absolutely. And in fact, there's a genetic predisposition to the disease, and if you don't have that predisposition, then it may be years before you ever get the disease.
We've been talking with Dr. Tim Arnott. He's a physician at the Lifestyle Center of America in Oklahoma. He helps people with many different Western diseases, as they do there at the Lifestyle Center of America. Today we've gotten some very practical tips and an update on mad cow disease. We hope that today's program has been helpful to you and that as a result you'll have health that lasts for a lifetime.